Hello, everyone. I am Dawn Westmoreland, and I'm coming from Asheville, North Carolina, the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains, where I've lived almost 20 years, coming from WPVM FM LP 103.7, the Voice of Asheville. And a big shout out to the station owner, Davine Dial, who has lived in New Orleans and is from that area, because today's topic is going to be around the New Orleans situation back to Hurricane Katrina. But before I get to that, let me tell you about the show. The show is about empowerment, broadly about empowerment in the workplace and in personal lives. So I bring on guests who can talk about strategies or stories about empowerment. So I'm delighted to have Sandy Rosenthal join me today. And we're going to talk about what Sandy did, what she stood up to over 19 years ago. Hi, Sandy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
Yes. And the show airs every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time Zone because I'm part of the Pacifica Network, syndicated. You may hear it a different day, a different time. So, hello, everyone, and welcome. Sandy, what happened over 19 years ago that you got involved? And I found you on Wikipedia when I started searching you.
So, over 19 years ago, an event happened that most people, if you were old enough to remember anything that happened 19 years ago, you probably thought there was a big monster storm that drowned the city of New Orleans. And you probably think that the city is 20 feet below sea level because that number was bandied about. And you probably heard that the local officials were just paying no attention to their flood protection. None of those things are true. What actually happened over 19 years ago is a set of levees, basically engineering infrastructure failed and it should have held. And because of that failure, because of that engineering failure, almost 1,400 people drowned, 100,000 people, excuse me, 1 million people were displaced for over a year. And the city is still working on trying to recover over 19 years ago.
Oh, my goodness. How did you get involved in this? What was your role at that time?
Well, there's that old saying, well, if no one else is going to do it, I guess I have to do it. Uh, and that's pretty much what happened. I believed that somebody needed to do something. Somebody needed to get the truth out there. I mean, if you were old enough to watch television in August of 2005, you were in front of the TV all week or more than a week,
Mhm.
and you were watching all day long, if you were old enough. So, in other words, unless you have gone to heaven, you remember that event and you probably think you know why it happened. And that is why I felt I had to do something. I had to let the nation and the world know that this catastrophe was preventable, it was avoidable, it was caused by people. And those people are actually the members of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and that is a federal agency in the United States.
Yes. What was your title or role at the time when all this happened? You were part of the city, or where were you working at this
So
time?
do you mean my title before I founded the nonprofit
Yes.
levees.org?
Yes.
Okay. So my title, okay, now I understand. Well, before that, I was in marketing. I was in marketing. I had over 20 years experience in marketing, and my specialty was copywriting. And I do have to say that really helped me out a lot when it came time to mobilize the community and get the word out about what really happened in New Orleans in August of 2005.
I see. But how did you know it was the engineer, the Corps of Engineers' fault? I mean, how did you have that kind of knowledge
You
that,
know, I get that question a lot. I mean, I'm not an engineer, so how did I know?
Mhm,
And I have to bring up Erin Brockovich. She wasn't an attorney. She
mhm.
wasn't even an attorney assistant.
Yeah.
She was a clerk, and she figured it out. And the answer to that is Erin and I were both looking and listening. And when we heard things that didn't make sense, we said so. We said we she has a different way of doing things than I do, but if we heard nonsense, we spoke up and said that we're not buying that. and we didn't give up. And that's what makes the two of us very, very similar. So I obviously, neither Aaron nor I figured it all out overnight. It took research, it took work, and most importantly, it took not giving up.
And we've talked before our interview, Sandy, about how we both have met her in person.
Mhm.
About 5 years ago, I met Erin Brockovich at a women's leadership program. And then I basically wanted to talk to her, and I was telling her about my blowing the whistle on the veteran affairs. And with her having children, a daughter and son that had served in the Army, she was very interested in my story, and I got to know her better, and I got to interview her later on. So a big shout out to Erin Brockovich. And I remember a word that she brought up a lot during the interview, and I know she still brings it up constantly, is stick to itness.
Mm.
And I like that because, Sandy, maybe you feel the same way, maybe you feel different. There are a lot of people who want to turn in people who are not doing the job right, or they see that there's going to be danger. Like you saw what happened there with the levees, but they don't have the courage to hang in there the whole time. What is it about you that makes you different? Because you hung in there.
I think there's a two-part answer to that. The first part is when I immediately was harassed for speaking the words I was saying. I was immediately harassed for saying, no, those levees should have held. This was engineering failure. I was harassed. Keep in mind, I wasn't a public figure. I wasn't an engineer.
Mhm.
Why are they going after me, a copywriter, who worked for an insurance company? Why were they going after me? Why was all this energy being spent on me? So I knew I was on the right track. If I wasn't 100% right, I was certainly on the right track. Oh, by the way, it turned up I was 100% right. But the other answer to that question is all I had to do was look around me and see the devastation and the heartbreak. It's been over 19 years. Some people still haven't recovered. A lot of people in the city of New Orleans, the moment they hear of a hurricane, they pack up and leave,
Yeah.
or are very, very stressed out. So, we all suffered our post-traumatic stress syndrome. And in my case, it was finding out the truth and making sure everyone found out what it was for me.
So you got harassed, and I'm not shocked at all, Sandy. I mean, because that often happens to whistleblowers. I certainly got my share of retaliation for speaking up about wrongdoing. What kind of retaliation did you get? You said you got harassed. Was it verbally, physically?
Sure. So this is, I need to orient the listener that this was 19 years ago. This was prior to YouTube, prior to Twitter, prior to social media as we know it today, which is a relatively protected space. You cannot go online and harass people online today without being shut down, without the owner of this platform locking you out. Okay. Some people manage to sweep through, but it's a different world now. It's a monitored world. It wasn't back then. So, as you see where I'm coming from, if I were to suppose there would be a newspaper article about the work that I was doing, and there were many, there would be comments, and the comments were vicious. And the comments said everything from calling me a child exploiter, because my own child did help me with the organization, or saying I'm an uptown woman with too much time on my hands, or you name the verbal harassments and taunts, I got it. You name it, I got it. And some of them were a lot uglier than that.
Oh, I'm
And this was,
sure.
but back in 19 years ago, nobody took them down. The newspapers, it was supposed to be the new way of the new way of community involvement. It was supposed to be this new era. It's supposed to be a beautiful thing. And everybody commented anonymously. For those of you who remember, It all started out anonymously and it was allowed. These days, you can't go on the New York Times and be anonymous. No,
And
you
that
have to tell them,
makes sense because then you can say anything and not be held accountable. Goodness.
right. It was a different world. And so the harassment was from unseen, unknown people, but they were real people. I mean, these
Yeah.
weren't robots. These weren't bots. These were real people out there.
Mm.
And I don't know why I didn't let that scare me off. The way I dealt with it, I just shut it out of my mind. I just didn't think about it. To think about it, it just distracted me from the work that needed to be done. So my harassment was verbal from people I could not see, but who were real people though, and it was obvious that they were here in New Orleans because they knew where I lived. They talked about where I live. Remember, they called me. I have too much time, and they could mention my neighborhood. That was a little scary.
Yeah, that sounds pretty intimidating. Sandy, how long did that go on? I mean, did that go on for weeks, months, years?
Years. I
Oh,
would say it continued until 20, it continued a good 8 years, 7 or 8 years after the flood event.
that is a long time. Now, let me ask, you've told me about retaliation and the negative. Did you receive positive laudatory comments, about taking action and notifying the world?
In the beginning, it was only people confused by what I was saying or disagreeing with what I was saying or ignoring me in the beginning. But I stuck with it. And bit by bit, more and more and more, each time I said something that turned out to be true, I started asking questions. I started collecting the answers. I kept put that information out there. Bit by bit, it was slow. I'll be honest, it was slow. But gradually, ever so gradually, I started getting the name levees.org on the map. And probably our first big breakthrough. Remember, I mentioned just a moment ago about the online commenting and they were anonymous? Well, get this, using online bloggers tools available to any amateur, I was able to figure out that those comments were coming from the Army Corps of Engineers headquarters. And the way I did it, it's called an IP address. It's kind of like caller
Yes. Oh,
ID
I
for
see.
your
IP
phone.
address makes sense.
IP addresses.
Mm.
And it is a little tiny bit complex how I figured it out. But if A equals B, then B equals C. So these people by these names were at the Army Corps of Engineers building. And I picked up the phone and I called the local TV station. And they did a big story about it. Now, so basically, the Army Corps of Engineers was caught with their pants down.
Yes.
And even, believe it or not, you ready, Dawn? It's not illegal. It's not illegal to harass for the Army Corps to harass local citizens,
Mm.
but the bad PR was it was incalculable. The Army Corps still hasn't recovered from being caught harassing local citizens online. The Army Corps of Engineers, the people who are supposed to be protecting us, were actually attacking us. So anyway, you see bit by bit by bit. And as I talk about in my podcast, which I'm not going to get into now because we're limited on time, but the big guys, the big harassers, think they're so big they're infallible. They make big mistakes.
Oh, I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
Yes, as another whistleblower, yes, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, right? Yeah.
Right.
So speaking out, you dealt with, crazy acting people being rude and trying to intimidate you. You said kept yourself from being distracted. Really, what was the final outcome, Sandy, that you were hoping to get out to the world?
Well, you're going to love this. I have not mentioned this before. It was actually those online critics who helped me figure out the big breakthrough.
Mm.
And the bottom line there is listen to your critics because they can accidentally give you information. And one of the online critics, I won't go into details now, it's all in my book, gave me an idea. And we pursued that idea. And that idea ended up being the turning point on how we finally got all of the major newspapers and all of the major media to stop blaming the storm and start blaming the Army Corps of Engineers. It was one of those online critics harassing me. Isn't that, how beautiful is that?
Yeah, that is amazing. To your knowledge, and sometimes you never hear about this, was anybody held accountable for that?
Nobody at the Army Corps of Engineers so much as lost a parking spot. The head of the Army Corps of Engineers, the top colonel at that time, did resign, and he called it to spend more time with his family. But
Huh,
there was no admission of doing any wrongdoing. And while it took many, many years, it took about 8 years for the Katrina lawsuit. There was a lawsuit. A bunch of attorneys did file lawsuit.
right.
And even in the end, at the very end, there was an appeal. And in the end, while the Army Corps of Engineers was found responsible, they could not be held financially liable because of a law passed in 1928 called the Flood Control Act of 1928. So the Army Corps shall be immune if their flood protection projects fail. And after that, the vicious attacks seemed to stop because there's no longer any chance that anybody in the city of New Orleans was going to get any money from those failures. So the only money we got was our own savings, our own insurance policies, and the help of volunteers. Thank goodness for volunteers. They saved us.
My goodness, I wasn't aware of that law. Uh, Wow, has anybody tried to amend that law at this time, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, no.
Hold people
Not to
accountable.
my knowledge.
Hmm. And I think that now is a good time, Sandy, to bring in. There are people who've reached out to me. Maybe they've reached out to you and they want to blow the whistle on something wrong, whether it's a nonprofit, the government, private, or something like that. What is your best advice for somebody who wants to speak up about wrongdoing or maybe something unethical?
I'm glad you asked. I've had several people want to blow the whistle. And one of the first things they all try to do is they try to do it alone. And I have to explain to them that no one person contains in one body, no matter how beautiful we all are, has all of the tools and the knowledge and the expertise and the training and some things are just inherent uh, to be able to take on the big guys. You need help. You need an attorney. You need an expert in marketing. You need an expert in media relations. You need a copywriter. Or you'll probably need all these things. In my case, I needed an engineer. But you'd be surprised how many big guys out there you need an engineer in order to beat them. So don't try to do it alone. Bring in help and don't worry that you don't have an army on day one. The army will come. It's like a build it and they will come sort of thing. You start speaking up, start speaking out, and the help will come. I promise.
That's great. And, one thing that I found as a whistleblower, you brought up some great, characters and people who can help, whistleblowers, is also depending on retaliation. Sometimes people deal with so much bullying or retaliation, harassment that they may need to seek some kind of mental health professional or counselor because it can be a lot and sometimes it's not much, but everybody handles stress and their mental
Mm.
health is unique and different. Yes.
Mhm.
Let's talk about the book you wrote.
Sure. Can I add one tiny little addendum to what we just said? When
Uh,
I said you need an attorney and a media expert, all these people will be willing to offer their services pro bono. Because there are a lot of people that can't help you with their face and with their name, but they can help you behind the scenes with their expertise and they won't charge you for it. So I just wanted to remind people of that. I didn't want them to think you had to have boatloads of money to pay all these people. So yes, I just wanted to throw that in. So the book, about 2 years before the 10th, no, before the 15th anniversary, my one of my advisors wrote to me, no, called me on the phone. He's an old timer. He uses the phone. And he said, Sandy, you need to write a book.
uh-huh.
And I sighed and I said, I know. I said, I'm a copywriter, but I'm not a book author. Those
Yeah.
are two very, very different things. And he said, but Sandy, no one can tell the story but you. So I said, okay. And I started writing a few weeks after he called me. And 5 years later, I finished that book. And I did get it published on time for the 15th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, which was August of 2020.
And the name of the book, and where can our listeners find this book?
So the name of the book is Words Whispered in Water: Why the Levees Broke in Hurricane Katrina. And it can be found online or at Amazon, although not many paperbacks are left. The publisher has sold all of their hard copies, so Amazon may have a few. Of course, you can still get it on Kindle and audiobook. But good news, if you're not able to get a hard copy, my publisher has offered to do a second edition. So I'm very excited about that. And that's going to be ready in July. Pre-orders can be taken in February 2025, and the book will be ready in July, right on time for the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina.
Sandy, what kind of reviews did you get from your readers? Or it could be your audiobook, because I love audiobooks too. What kind of comments did you get after they read your book or heard your book?
Uh, Goodness, I'm going to tell you two of my favorites. Okay. One of my favorites is the book read like a Grisham novel on a Pensacola beach in summer. So, in other words, it's a page turner. Okay. And I love that. The other comment that I love, and I get this a lot, is well, I knew all about why the levees broke. I just knew all the wrong things. So, in other words, people were totally blown away. People thought they knew why the levees broke. It turned up that they didn't.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Yeah, I didn't know it had to do with the levees. You know, growing up in Florida, we deal with hurricanes all the time as a child. And I know with the weather changes that we face, you know, these years now, that they're getting stronger and stronger.
And more rapidly intensifying, which is almost as bad as the stronger.
We used to joke about it years ago that of all the storms, a hurricane is the best to deal with because you get enough time and notice to get out of the, you know, wherever you're at. And I don't know if that's always so true because not everybody can leave. And so after Hurricane Katrina hit and you get the word out about the levee failure, have other cities or states come to you or try to make changes with their levees and with their infrastructures and structures?
The answer is there's been a lot of changes since the levees broke during Katrina. One of the most important was made almost immediately, and that was providing for pets. And let me explain why. It wasn't about the pet. It was because people wouldn't evacuate. They stayed home to take care of their pets.
Yes.
The evacuation buses wouldn't take their pets, so they stayed home and perished with their pet. So immediately that law was passed. Also, as far as levees building, the Army Corps of Engineers no longer build the type of levees that broke here in New Orleans. So in other words, the entire country's safer. You know, 62% of the American population lives in counties protected by levees. So that means 2/3 of the nation is better off just because of that change. And then the third change, evacuations. If you've never had to evacuate, you have no idea what it's like. It's not a vacation. It's not a party. It is stressful. You don't know if you should leave. You don't know when you should leave. It is one of the most stressful things you can possibly go through. And then they're dangerous. I don't want to make your listeners cry of telling you about how much sorrow has been caused by evacuation. So more and more, you're seeing things on how to hide in place, not hide in place. It's called instead of evacuating, shelter in place.
Yeah.
Shelter in place, and there are ways to shelter in place. I mean, hurricanes have been going on since the beginning of time, and people who live on islands don't have an evacuation route. So you know what they do? They go up. Okay. So in New Orleans, we also have shelter in place, and we're getting there. It's not complete. And I believe I recently read that we're no longer going to be doing contraflow, and that means where you take every road and make both ways go out. I read recently that they're not going to do that anymore. So there's a shift in the attitude of you can't run away from everything. And odds are you're going to run into another problem. So yeah, the answer to your question is yes. There's been lots of changes in these not past 19 years.
And that's a good thing. Thank goodness.
Mm.
So today you identify with being an author and a community, um, is it mobile?
Mobilizer.
Tell us
Mobilizer.
what is that?
Sure. So I mentioned a few minutes ago, you can't do anything alone.
Mhm.
Don't even try. But however, even a small group, even a small one, 5 to 10 people has the power to stop the big guys. I've seen it happen over and over, but you have to mobilize. So by mobilizing, that means, without getting into the weeds, it means gathering together, anywhere from 5 to 50 like-minded people who all agree that something needs to be done or something needs to be stopped or something needs to be improved, and get them all working together, all speaking with the same voice, and voila, miracles can happen. Mountains can get moved. I've seen it happen over and over. And I'll tell you what, guiding people through this process is a lot of fun. I've been having a lot of fun doing that.
That's amazing. And I'm really glad that you talked about evacuations because I remember evacuating, it's been 20 something years ago, Hurricane Opal, which came in really strong. I think it came in as a category 4, but it's been over 20 something years ago. And most people they're just not prepared for it. You
Yep.
think, oh, I'll stay, I got animals. Oh, I don't want to leave, my home, somebody could break in. I'm glad you talked about that because I know I evacuated at the time I was married, and I kept saying to my husband, "We got to go, we got to go," and he kept dragging it out. And I'm like, "No, I'm telling you, I'm from Florida. We got to go. I know about these hurricanes. We got to go." And my mistake, because I wasn't thinking, we were really stressed out, was calling ahead and trying to find a hotel motel. We had to drive 14 hours till we found a hotel, and then we got the very last room with AC. And this is in October, which is still very, very hot. And then somebody came in right after us. Come to find out, they were from our neighborhood, and there was one room left with no AC, and they said they would gladly take it because they'd been on the road as long as we had. So what a lesson. We can learn so much from these hurricanes and also working together. See,
But it's stressful. I understand why you forgot to make a hotel reservation. You've got all these other things you had to take care of. Oh, making a reservation. And probably during that time you didn't have cell phones. So you couldn't do it from the road, right?
no,
No, of
it was
course
over
not.
20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, you couldn't do that from the road. Oh no, I totally understand it. Evacuations are one of the most stressful things one can ever possibly do. And only a small percentage of the population even really understands what it feels like. I mean, we all know the what are the top three, Dawn? They are a divorce, losing a spouse, losing a job or a new job. And what was the third? Like the three tops most stressful thing. There was another one. But
Divorce.
evacuation, I mean, what
Hurricane
percent of the population has ever had to evacuate?
There was so much damage we came back to. We were very fortunate. Yeah. Well, we are running out of time. This is
Okay.
such a delight to get to know you better, Sandy. Thank you for all that you do. I know our listeners are going to want to reach out to you, find out more about your book. Again, please tell us how anybody can get a hold of you. And also, again, how can we get a hold of your book?
Okay, I'm going to make this really easy for your listeners. I'm not going to give you a bunch of different websites, but everything can be found in one place. You can find out about me, my book, my organization, my podcast. It's all right there. And it's very simple. My name, sandyrosenthal.net.
Awesome. And we do have time for you to talk about just so quickly about your podcast because the title of it is just amazing.
Sure. Well, after I stopped, excuse me, starting again. After I exposed the Army Corps of Engineers as being the culprit in what they were calling a natural disaster, I thought to myself, well, if I could do this, anyone can do anything. So I had the whole time I was doing this, I fantasized about educating and helping and assisting other people on how to do the same thing because all the big guys play out of the identical playbook,
Yes, yeah.
all of them.
Yeah. We almost
Whether
had
it be a homeowners association or an oil company, they're all playing out of the same playbook. And so I've just completed my 115th episode of Beat the Big Guys, and there's more on the way.
Great. We're out of time, folks. Sandy, thank you. Thank you for all you do. Everyone stay empowered. We'll see you next time.